It's been a long time coming, especially since I seriously considered buying one of these myself about 2 years ago, but I have finally gotten my hands on the 3-row version of the Land Rover Discovery, and this is the model with the new inline-6 engine. This is definitely the way I think everybody should be buying their Discovery. In this video, I'm going to show you around the Discovery. We'll talk about how it handles on the road, what you might want to cross-shop this against, why you might want to get a Discovery, and why you might want to get something else. Now, the first big reason to get the Discovery is its towing capability. This is one of the very few SUVs out there that is rated to tow over 8,000 pounds and is not the size of a small house in its own right. So this is considerably smaller than a Wagoneer or a Grand Wagoneer or an Escalade or a Navigator. But you find that same level of opulence on the inside in a smaller package with very, very high tow ratings. And that is the big reason that I was cross-shopping this against the Durango that I ended up getting, because they are the only two models that are in this mid-size format that will tow over 8,000 pounds. I've always had a soft spot for Land Rover's design language. I like the fact that it's restrained and yet still elegant. It's distinctive, but it doesn't come across as outlandish like we find in some of the German options. We have a pretty discreet grille there, but lots of extra cooling going on down there at the bottom. 360-degree camera right there up front because this is a bit more off-road focused than the average German crossover. Definitely putting that camera lower is going to give you a better view of what you're going to go across rather than simply how you're going to park the vehicle in suburbia. We have full LED headlights here, lots of functional cooling again down below, so these side vents, those are perfectly functional. The version we're all looking at today is the R-Dynamic version of the Discovery 3-row. So we have blacked out Discovery logo there, blacked out grille, and then black sections down at the bottom of the bumper. Thankfully, however, no blacked out wheels. I'm not the biggest fan of black wheels. These tires are 275/45 R21, so not exactly the most off-road focused tire on this particular trim. At 195.1 inches long, this is a little bit longer than an X5 and a little bit longer than a GLE in order to give this a slightly more comfortable third row than you'll find in either of those two options, but it is a bit shorter than an Audi Q7. You'll also notice it's definitely higher off the ground than any of those other German options. Up to 11 inches of ground clearance thanks to the adaptive air suspension. It will lower itself to improve aerodynamics and of course make it easier to get in and out of the vehicle, or raise up to this height for off-roading and fording nearly 3 feet of water. One of the big differentiators between the Discovery and the X5 or the GLE or the Q7 or really anything outside of something along the lines of a Jeep Grand Cherokee L is that this is much more off-road capable than the average European vehicle in this segment, whether you want to call them SUVs or crossovers. This one has a 2-speed transfer case, it has an adaptive air suspension, over 11 inches of ground clearance, and again, much more of a focus on its off-road mission. On the inside, you'll find a knob that controls the Land Rover terrain management system. There are a ton of different drive modes that adapt the braking systems and the four-wheel drive systems in this vehicle to various forms of off-road terrain. None of that is found on an X5 or a GLE or a Q7. I've never been the biggest fan of asymmetrical car designs, but that's something that the Discovery has been known for. It has been toned down for this generation, however. It's really just limited to the license plate slot right there. We have the actual location for the license plate, and then over here on this side, we have the Land Rover logo and the little logo for the engine that we have under the hood. This one is the P360. Since this is the R-Dynamic trim, we have blacked out sections rather than chrome in the rear. Very sort of concept car-like taillights, which I really appreciate because these are a lot easier to clean. There really aren't any bumps and folds in here that are difficult to dust in the back. Down here at the bottom of the bumper, we have the 7-pin wiring harness connection, 2-inch receiver, and a big tow hook recovery location right in the middle. I have to say, I really love how they've located this recovery location rather than putting it separately on either side of the bumper. You don't have quite the same sort of flexibility, but it is really elegantly integrated. Although lots of rumors have swirled about a potential upcoming V8 version of the Discovery, it has not happened yet and we don't see one currently announced. Instead, there are just 2 engines available in the United States. A 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo producing 296 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. That model is rated to tow 5,952 pounds, or this engine, which is identified by that P360 badge on the back. This is a new 3-liter inline-6 engine related to the 2-liter turbo, producing 355 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque. This is mated to a 48-volt mild hybrid system and will give you 21 miles per gallon combined with standard all-wheel drive. This is the model that's rated to tow over 8,200 pounds. I found front seat comfort in this model to be excellent. We have a multi-way adjustable driver's seat with inflatable side cushions, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, and a memory-linked powered tilt telescopic steering column, although in typical Jaguar Land Rover fashion, the knob to adjust the power steering column is on the other side. The driver's seat has a 3-position memory with controls over there on the door, and so does the front passenger seat, and it has the same range of motion as the driver's seat. Jumping into the second row, we have a generous amount of legroom and a power recline mechanism, which is kind of an interesting touch. Although for a power recline mechanism, the range of motion is fairly small. It's only about 2 inches or so. You can manually slide the second row seats forward and backward to help apportion space a little bit more equitably with the third row. And there's plenty of headroom back here. If you didn't notice on the outside, the Discovery has a very tall profile. And that really means that on the inside, it's very comfortable for taller people. And even though some of the legroom dimensions may appear to be a little bit lower than some of the competition, if you have the opportunity to sit more upright, a little bit more forward, then you actually get more real-world legroom versus something that's a bit more reclined. Moving over here to the middle seat, there's definitely plenty of room here, even though there is this module here with lights and air vents in it. I still have about 5 inches of headroom left because this one has a large dual pane moonroof setup. So there's one up here for the front passenger, and one back here for the second row and third row, but that ends up right about where the second row passenger's middle seat head would be. Moving over here to the right side, I still have pretty generous headroom, again because of that large moonroof opening, and this front seat's all the way back to its tracks. As you can see, I still have some legroom left. Every 3-row version of the Discovery has 7 seats. There's always going to be a middle seat here, and it is always going to be a 40-20-40 folding middle seat design, which is very cargo practical. That means that you could put 4 people in here and lots of extra cargo, including snowboards, skis, that sort of thing, right here on the inside without a problem. And another nice touch is that the shoulder belt for this middle seat actually comes out of the outboard seating position rather than out of the ceiling, and that means that the ceiling is very square in the rear, and if you were to put a child seat right here in the middle, it's not going to skew strangely from one side to the other. Now when it comes to child seat accommodations, we just have 2 sets of latch acres here in the second row, nothing for that middle seat. Rear seat passengers enjoy 4-zone climate control in this model. There are also some USB charge-only ports down there at the bottom, 2 USB-C and 1 regular USB under that door. Over here we have a dock for a tablet holder. That's kind of a handy touch. Another USB charge port right there behind that little slidey door. You can see that dual pane moonroof setup, and then right in between we have air vents and reading lights for the second row. Getting into the third row is fairly easy. We don't have a power flip fold design like we find in some options. Instead, the seat sort of goes forward like that in a powered fashion, then we slide it forward manually. Now, getting actually into the third row is going to be a little bit more difficult than in some of the options because the door opening in the rear is fairly small. That's likely due to the off-road mission of the Discovery. The wheelbase is a bit shorter than some of the competition, and the rear wheel is really located right around here. That means that the rear door opening couldn't be as square as in some of the competitors. You'll really notice that right back here in the third row. Now, the other thing you're going to notice back here is how much room we get in the third row. I'm 6 feet tall. I can lean all the way back here, put my head on the headrest, and I still have about ½ an inch of headroom left. This third row is very generously sized, and it really helps that this is only a 2-person third row, again because of the location of those wheel wells. Now, if I were to move this second row seat back into place, it's going all the way back in its tracks, press the button to return it to its upright position where it was before, then I have basically no legroom left. Although it is possible for the second row person to slide their seat maybe about 1 inch forward or give it a little bit less recline, something along those lines, and then give a little bit more comfort to the third row passengers. Again, likely due to the off-roading mission of the Discovery, we have assist handles back here in the third row so you can hang on for dear life. We also have air vents in the back and teeny tiny little storage areas with a tiny bit of extra padding, although they are awfully high for an armrest. Going in for a closer look, you can really see how dramatically tapered that rear door is. We have a little bit of extra storage on either side of the third row bench. We have those padded storage cubbies right there, and then this is where the roller cover docks when the third row is folded. As we see in a lot of vehicles with a more rugged off-road mission, there's not a lot of cargo area back here. Behind the third row, we find just 11.5 cubic feet, and you could not put even a 22-inch roller bag back here. So if you're going to try and put 6 people on the inside and go away for a weekend, all that stuff's going to have to go on the roof. Most people, however, are probably going to keep the third row folded most of the time, and if you do that, then you're going to have access to about 45 cubic feet of cargo space that is definitely above the average compact crossover. Land Rover gives you somewhere to put the roller cargo cover if the third row is in use. Unfortunately, that somewhere is just right there, basically in a slot on the load floor, not tucked away out of sight. And that's because under the load floor, there's not a lot of additional space, just a very tiny slot right there. On the left side of the cargo compartment, we have the controls for the power folding second row, power folding third row. These buttons raise and lower the air suspension to make cargo loading a little bit easier. We then have a 12-volt power port. That's kind of a nice touch. Grocery bag hooks on either side, some additional hooks here, and you can see where that roller cargo cover would slot just behind the second row. In case you're wondering, yes, we have a spare tire. In this model, it is not a full-size spare, but you can see that a full-size spare would definitely fit under here. As we look around the interior, keep in mind this is obviously not a base model. Up here we have the controls for the dual pane moonroof. The first pane right here above the driver and front passengers' heads, this one opens. It doesn't open quite as far as some folks might want, but the rear glass portion, that does not open at all. It just has a power shade. The driver and front passenger have fixed height shoulder belts, but 4-way adjustable headrests. And as you can see, the upholstery in here is a two-tone sort of ivory and charcoal motif. The front seat backs have been slimmed down to help improve interior legroom. They're definitely still very comfortable, but it does make the headrest look oddly large. The seat back and seat bottom cushion are perforated because ventilated seats are available, but this particular model does not have that option. These are just heated. Definitely useful if you want to take your Discovery a little bit further off the beaten path. We have those inflatable side bolsters on both front seats and lots of premium materials all throughout this cabin. The upper portions of the door are made from soft touch materials, although we do have some harder plastics down there at the bottom of the door to help improve durability. And in very classic Land Rover fashion, we have switches that really face the ceiling here. So the memory switches, door unlock switches, and the window switches, those are basically pointing up. You can see that there's lots of texture going on that ivory section on the door, and that continues over to the dashboard where we have lots of stitched and premium materials going on here as well. The upper portion of the dashboard is stitched, as is this mid-level portion of the dash. Over here we have a button to open the upper glove compartment. If I pop that open, you can see we have a pretty large slot in there. You could fit some smaller tablet computers, maybe 8 or possibly 9 inches, definitely large smartphones, etc. There's also a 12-volt power port inside. And then below that we have the main glove compartment, which is a bin style, and in here you could fit perhaps a 10-inch tablet computer inside. It's just a little bit too small for an 11-inch tablet. In the middle of the dash, we have a center channel speaker, 2 large air vents, and then the latest touchscreen infotainment system from Land Rover. The thing you're going to notice right away about this infotainment system is that it's very high resolution and the image surface is bonded very closely to the glass. So it has this appearance of the image really being right on the surface that reduces glare, and it really helps make the display pop. No Land Rover would be complete without tons of 4-wheel drive information, so of course we find that here. We find wheel articulation, whether or not the transfer case is locked in the center, no locking rear differential here. We also have inclination, things like that, the bearing there. Over here on weight sensing, you can see your maximum weight depth, and you can find out exactly how much weighting you're really doing. In the 360-degree camera mode, we have an augmented reality mode, although you cannot drag the camera around as easily as you can in some competitive 360-degree camera systems. You do have the ability to focus in on certain areas, things like that, rotate the vehicle around, and go for different augmented reality camera views, as well as the standard camera views. Below the LCD, we find some physical controls for the climate control system. The front 2 zones are operated by these knobs, and then they also serve 2 additional functions. If I push them in, they then move to seat heating and ventilation. If I then pull them out, then it serves as the fan control. Auto mode is restored by that button right there, and if I push it back in, you'll notice that I'm back to the temperature adjustment. The button bank in the middle is a combination of physical button and touch button, so there's actually one button right under there. You can see the whole module move just a little bit. The touch sensor is there so the system knows which option I pressed. If I push this silver button right there, this panel drops down to reveal a pretty large storage compartment. You can definitely put larger smartphones inside. Under that, we have 2 more large storage areas for smartphones, single USB input over there, 2 very large cup holders. You can close these off with this roller cover if you want. The power and volume knob for the infotainment system is in kind of an awkward spot. It's just there in front of this joystick-style shifter. On the back of the shifter, there's a button. That's how you actually change gears. So you press the button, then we pull the shifter back for drive, toggle it once more for sport, push the button, push it forward for reverse. Park is that button right there. Over here we have the terrain management knob that allows us to select between a wide variety of different off-road programs, including sand, mud ruts, rock crawling, and wading. If you don't like the look of the knob popped out from the dashboard, you can simply stow it away by pressing it down. We then have a button for hill descent control and a button to engage low ratio mode. Unlike most of the European option, this does have a true 2-speed transfer case. As in a number of other Land Rover models, we have independent armrests for the driver and front passenger, and then a softly padded center console. If I open this up, it's a 2-tiered affair, so there's one tier right there, and then a pretty deep storage well below. You can see here also from this angle, there's the knob to adjust the height of the armrest for the driver and front passenger. If you're not a fan of the itty-bitty armrest, you can always fold it out of the way, and you'd never even know it was there. No luxury car would be complete without a heads-up display, so of course we have one over there on the driver's side. We then have a full-color LCD instrument cluster. Although not as configurable as some of the clusters that we find in Mercedes models, we do have several different layouts, a 1-dial layout, a 2-dial layout. We also have a full map layout, a media-centric layout there, so you can see what's been playing from your infotainment system, although it doesn't give us as much info from CarPlay as it does from other sources. And then one look that focuses mainly on driver assistance. So for instance, in this particular display, it's going to show you things like lane control and adaptive cruise control functionality. And of course, again, since it's a Land Rover, if you plan on taking your 3-row vehicle off-road, you do have access to more off-road information right there in the LCD. Moving out from there, we have a round wheel with a chunky 4-spoke design. These plastic spokes are sort of, I guess, imitation satin metal. They definitely look metal, but when you touch them, you'll notice they're not. That definitely is going to make them feel cooler in the summer. On the back of the wheel, we have paddle shifters down on the left and up over there on the right. On the right side of the wheel, you find the controls for the adaptive cruise control system or the regular cruise control system, depending on the option you get. This one does not have adaptive cruise control. There's just a limiter function right there, also a steering wheel heating button. On the left side of the wheel, we find volume up-down on this little scroll wheel, track forward, backward down there at the bottom, and then this button bank also serves as the controls for that multifunction LCD. Changing icons is something that we've seen from Land Rover before, but I think it's done really elegantly in this version. You can see, clicking that center there, how the display changes between those different icons. There was a time in the world where even luxury SUVs needed to be off-road capable, and luxury SUVs like this Land Rover Discovery were perhaps targeted at people that lived in an area like I do. They live off the beaten path, or they have a ranch, or they have a farm, or something like that, and they want luxury transportation and all the amenities, but they still need that off-road capability. To be perfectly frank, that's not really the world we live in today, even though that segment of society still exists. The explosion in SUV sales did not occur because more people decided to move out to the country, live off the grid, buy a ranch or buy a farm, etc. It's simply because they wanted the lifestyle. And that's exactly why we see such an explosion in sales of arguably Lexus crossovers and BMW crossovers and Mercedes crossovers, etc., etc., etc. But Land Rover has stayed true to that off-road mission, and that really makes this unique because, again, we still have that 2-speed transfer case. We have a suspension that is designed for off-road duty, and that really does pay some benefits if you live out on a rougher road like I live on here. This has an excellently tuned suspension, even if we're in the off-road height mode. If I lower the ride height down to its standard off-road mode, it's going to be even more comfortable out on this road, including some of these large potholes that are out here on this gravel section. That's because unlike some adaptive air suspensions with the max height mode, this does not in fact push the tires all the way to the bottom of their travel. There is still some travel left, so in this off-road mode, you can still actually go off-road. And that may sound silly, but for instance, in the previous generation Grand Cherokee in off-road 2 mode, there was really no suspension travel left, and that was very, very rough out on any surface that wasn't absolutely perfect. In terms of 0 to 60 times, this 3-liter inline-6 managed to move this from 0 to 60 in 6 seconds even. That's definitely a respectable time. You will go faster in the 3-liter inline-6 BMW X5, but it's not going to have a 2-speed transfer case, it's not going to have all the sort of amenities we find in here, and it's going to have a smaller third row. In by 60 to 0 braking test, it took 128 feet for this to stop from 60 miles an hour. That's a respectable time considering what this vehicle is. Now, if you want to take this further off the beaten path, you're going to need to swap these tires and wheels out for something that's a bit more off-road capable. 21-inch wheels, not exactly what I would want to off-road with, but that's a relatively easy change, and everything else about the vehicle is definitely focused on that mission. That's probably the best way to describe this. If you wanted to take a BMW X5, the kind of places you could take this Disco, you would need to do an awful lot more than simply a wheel and tire swap. You'd need to put in a 2-speed transfer case. You'd need to adapt the suspension system to make it higher, give it better clearance numbers, etc. And you'd need to bring along a spare tire. That's going to be an awful lot more complicated than simply a tire swap in something like this. And that's always been the big selling point for Land Rover. Now, on the downside, the off-road mission of the Discovery means that this is not going to handle like a BMW or a Mercedes. This is certainly a bit higher off the ground, it's a bit more isolated in terms of the steering feel. You'll definitely get more tip and dive, more body roll, a little bit of wallow here and there depending on the road surface you're on. But then again, this is not going to feel like a 1990s or early 2000s Land Rover either. Those were certainly a little bit more skewed towards off-roading ability, and I think that Land Rover, thanks to the adaptive electronics we now find in new models, has managed to find an excellent middle of the road. They're still more capable than they have ever been before, but they managed to balance that out with more on-road driving dynamics than they've ever had before. But that said, I'm still going to have to give this a B- when it comes to handling in the luxury segment. You will certainly find a more engaging drive in something like the Volvo XC90 or the BMW or the Mercedes, etc., etc. This is, however, much more composed and more real-world livable than something like a Lexus GX, well, arguably being more off-road capable than that GX model as well. On the flip side, when it comes to ride quality, the off-road mission definitely helps, and this has an absolutely perfect ride for this group. I'm going to give this an A+ when it comes to the ride score. Also, cabin noise. 70 decibels in here means this is a little bit louder than the X5, but it is certainly very, very quiet. So I'm certainly going to give this an A when it comes to cabin noise. The thing that really surprised me is my fuel economy average over a week in this model. I've been averaging 22 mpg. That's definitely better than the EPA score says it should be, and that's definitely better than a number of vehicles in this segment that are not as off-road focused as this particular model. Let's talk briefly about towing, because the tow rating in this vehicle is significantly higher than the competition. Now, the main reason for that is actually the off-road mission that we find in the Land Rover. We have the adaptive air suspension, which can load level in the rear. We also have a body structure that is simply designed to be more rigid, with more sturdy attachment points for the rear suspension. That is a big, big factor when it comes to towing capability. In order to handle the kind of shocks and bumps that you can get into the cabin when a vehicle is on 2 wheels or 3 wheels or 1 wheel, etc., it's teeter-tottering, all that sort of stuff, or just running against big bumps if you're running through a sand dune, etc., you need very sturdy attachment points to the chassis. Very similar to what you honestly find in performance-oriented crossovers like a BMW X5M. Only in a dedicated performance vehicle, you typically don't have the same kind of rear suspension geometry that would support higher payloads and higher towing abilities. But here in this vehicle, we have the combination of everything, and that's what's allowed them to improve the cooling system and give it that high tow rating. Basically the same reason that we also find high tow ratings in, for instance, the Jeep Grand Cherokee and something like the Dodge Durango. Same sort of design philosophy was going on in all of those vehicles as in this one, and that's why all of them have relatively high towing ability. Now, before we go, I should answer a few questions that I've had recently about this inline-6 engine. This is not quite as smooth as the Mercedes and the BMW inline-6, although you'd be hard-pressed to know when the vehicle is underway. You'll mainly notice it when it's idling. It does have sort of a vague diesel sort of sound to it, and that's simply because this is a direct injection engine. And for some reason, the injector noise is not quite as hidden as we find in the BMW and the Mercedes. But if I were to slow down here, drop it into second gear, and just hang out towards the red line, you'll notice that the engine has a very, very smooth sound to it. It sounds very much like the BMW and the Mercedes. There's nothing rough going on, nothing gruff either. I think the reason that some people are confused is that they hear these at idle and it sounds a little bit diesel-y under the hood. That just has to do with the way that Land Rover has designed the injection system and probably the sound deadening under the hood. Now, sound deadening in the firewall, that is done very well. So the cabin is very quiet even at higher engine speeds. It's just on the outside that you might hear a little bit of that rattle. In order to keep the YouTube algorithm happy, you'll now find pricing and comparisons in a second video. Just watch this all the way to the end, hit the pricing and comparison button on the lower right-hand side of your screen. In the meantime, be sure to hit the subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen as well if you haven't already done so. Find us over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those other social places, and we'll see you over there in part 2.